Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 122nd edition of the Frank and Stan chat. And those of you who are watching on the video will see that we have a very familiar guest back with us this week. Hello, Kendra.
Hi, Frank. Hi, Stan.
Hi, Kendra.
Thank you for joining. Yeah, thank you for joining us. And for those on the podcast,
I've become like the was he called David Fairclough, the super sub at Liverpool? Someone drops out.
Yes.
Bring me in, super
go
sub.
for Kendra. Yeah. So for those of you on the podcast and the video cast, you might not be aware, but the guest that we planned to have this week was unable to make it, and that was going to be with Stan and Kendra doing the show. But because of that person dropping out, then we're actually delaying the recording until I've got back. So I got back late last night, had a lovely few days in southern Spain, and looking outside, it's absolutely pouring down. So, but anyway, let's move on. Again, oh, what a week. What a week. Anyway, lots of things going on. We might actually cover one of them. If you were to predict what the areas that we would be talking about this week, you would probably predict that we would talk about something to do with the Prime Minister and shenanigans around who might be the next one. But let's see whether we actually get down that road or not. So Stan, what's caught your... Oh, Kendra, before we start, because there might be one or two people who don't know who you are, it's probably worthwhile just for new people to this site, if you could just explain who you are and how you know us.
So I'm Kendra Allen. I was a head teacher in Lancashire for a number of years, ending up at a 3-form entry in Burnley Primary School. And Stan, for his sins, was my mentor as a new head teacher when I was head of a tiny village school in Whitworth. And I used to go to his school and he'd show me around. I won't bore you with the things that I've already told you about that. And Frank, we've met a couple of times now. We met at a conference, and so I've known Stan for donkey's years. We both, well, Stan had hair, and I didn't dye mine when I met him.
And I know that, Kendra, when you've been on before, you are one of the most watched people. So the things that you cover, the things you say, really does sort of strike a chord with people. And we're really lucky to have such great guests as you, because when, like a few weeks ago, when it was just Stan and I, the viewing figures plummeted. So we know.
But I've not watched that one yet. So it will go up by one.
I think we've worked out what the strength of the Frank and Stan chat is, and it's often the guests. So anyway, Stan, in a week where a lot has happened, what's caught your eye?
Well, what's caught my eye, it happened probably about 3 or 4 weeks ago when it was leaked that Ofsted had given sort of crib sheets out to head teachers who were inspecting but hadn't shared them any wider. And of course, as soon as that's known, they were leaked. People have done work with them. And to be honest, having seen at least the list of all the questions that are held in it, it's a bit disappointing that they didn't put a bit more work into it and release it as an option for self-evaluation, a prompt for self-evaluation, because I don't think there's enough work gone into it to make it work yet. And some of the questions given to a primary school head of art, for example, might not be the best questions.
Have you got an example? Have you got an example?
Of course he has.
Can you show me some examples of approaches your school uses to support pupils remembering what's on the art curriculum over time? Is that something that when you're designing your art curriculum, you think, I must find a way that the children remember what's on the curriculum over time? Yeah. They're just not appropriate questions to support, and they all come with...
you think of the age as well, the age of some of the children that will be answering them.
They move from Key Stage 1 to Key Stage 2 and things they've learned in early years. One what knowledge do pupils need to be able to be X? In other words, and the example of X is explore, experiment, create, and draw. So what knowledge do they need to be able to create?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I always go back to the very youngest children when you put a pencil in their hand. You know,
Well, I go on to Ken Robinson to say the youngest children are creative, and few of them manage to keep that creativity.
Oh, it's knocked out of them, isn't it?
Yeah, through primary school. But it's just the balance of the questions. For example, there are 38 art questions listed, but only 22 music questions, and only 8 modern foreign language questions. So there's no equity in it. And I think with a bit of tweaking and a bit of professional oversight of it, it could have listed some questions that you could say, we would expect subject leaders to be able to address these answers, school leadership team to address these, a teacher to address these, a governor to address these.
But Stan, though, wouldn't you have thought, I mean, if I'm just, again, move it back to our experiences of leaders of schools, that you've set a task for your sort of heads of department or your curriculum leaders, and they produce for you something that is completely different in each case. And you're thinking, I've got to roll this out across the country. You know, wouldn't it dawn on you to think, actually, those 8 questions, you know, they might in modern foreign languages, they might be brilliant questions, but actually it's going to look a bit half-baked against the 38 or whatever it was in another subject.
66 for English.
Yeah, you think, well, hang on a minute, isn't that? Oh, I'm not sure that even if you weren't going to publish it, you know, if you're training your inspectors along these lines, and that gives me a feeling of a lack of control and oversight over the people producing these.
Yeah, well, what I've been trying to play with is putting them into some sort of grid affair where you've got, you know, these are questions about the curriculum design, these are questions about leadership, these are questions about teaching and learning.
Good luck.
But you can't transfer. You know, I struggled with the music one, but where there's only a few questions, there's only 22 questions, but kind of knocked that into some kind of shape and thought, that's it now. I've cracked it. I'll be able to transfer the rest of the questions. Not a chance. Not a chance.
But you imagine that,
because it's a wasted resource then. Because what will happen, and you know what will happen, these will be circulated to schools, and subject leaders and teachers will be learning the answers to these random questions.
But I mean,
I told the head teachers I work with, I've begged them not to even look at them. Just let your school be your school. Do the best that you can for your children. You've got an Ofsted framework. There's a framework there. If you want to read anything, read the framework. You don't need knowledge maps.
Yeah, but they've been written for inspectors who don't have a very broad understanding of these subjects.
But these are supposedly head teachers.
I know. But you and I, we all know, I mean, particularly if you're in a secondary setting, you know, your actual knowledge of the specifics of a particular curriculum area can be pretty slim, can't they? You know,
I suppose our experience equally was, you know, what's your area of expertise? And it was, you know, well, I'm a head teacher of a primary school. Yeah. Oh, well, no, I can think of one advisor that you've taught in early years for a year, so you'll be the early years expert in our team. I think I was leadership and management, and that was only because I couldn't think of anything else.
One of the things, though, that Kendra said before, which I don't know whether you want to repeat it, is about the confidence you had in HMI working with you and trying to, either with you as a head or working with schools that you were trying to improve, which I think I hear people, I've got to be careful because having come from that, you think, oh, you always go back and say, oh, those were the days, you know, but actually there was great variability anyway.
I think we should say
as a head.
Kendra was ahead in quite a few schools that were in difficulty because she was the authority's go-to head teacher to sort things out.
Well, thank you, because I was going to stress. I did go. I mentioned last time I'd had 20 odd inspections, and I did go. I didn't go to the school and they became special measures or serious weakness requires improvement. I was. I loved it. That's my forte as a head. I don't. People always say, "Oh, Kendra, you know, you were a great head." No, I wasn't a great head. I didn't have the ability to move a school from good to outstanding because I didn't want to. I didn't want the stress on the staff or anything like that. I didn't think it meant anything. My strength was moving schools in difficulty and rapid movement to get them to good, and then embed that. That was what I wanted to do. So I had 20 odd inspections because of the schools that I was working in. And I loved HMI. I would much rather in those days have worked with HMI than an Ofsted inspector, because they listened, they had time, they knew the stuff, they were intelligent, they'd worked at senior levels in schools. And in my last inspection as a head teacher, I ended up on the second day, and I know I'm not advocating this as a way forward, this is my personality, because the inspector kept looking at his watch. I was talking to him about the school, he kept looking at his watch, and he stood up to leave the room, and I slammed the desk with my hands and just said, "You need to sit down, you need to stop looking at your watch, and you need to listen to me, because you are not learning about my school." And fortunately he did. Fortunately he listened and the school got good. But that's what it amounts to now. I've got this to do, I've got this meeting, I've got to go and meet the English, I've got to go and meet the governors, I've got to go and observe a lesson, and I've only got a short amount of time, and I'm going to give you a report that at best will be 2-3 sides long. No, it was at that point that I thought, no, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep fighting for these schools in tough circumstances, with staff working so hard, for someone to come in, swan in 2 days, less experience than I had, and not listen to me. But in the past, HMI were just wonderful. Sorry, that's my. I'll get off my soapbox now.
No, I have to. I mean, it's great. Somebody who worked, for a number of years at HMI. It's lovely to hear that. Although I have to say, when I first joined the ranks of HMI, which is in 2001,
just to be clear, Frank, Kendra's talking before your time.
But Stan and I had a year in the mid-90s where we worked with HMI, and actually there was, I think it was the variety of people that they had in there. I remember speaking to a very experienced HMI who I got to know quite well, but he'd taught in East Africa. He'd worked in schools in the Northwest. He'd spent some time in East Africa. He'd done lots of work through the Ofsted's arrangements to go and actually inspect service schools and various things overseas. It was all sort of part of it all went in the melting pot. So it wasn't like when he came across something that was a bit unusual or there was a sense that he was able to draw on a really broad range of experiences to just try and make sense of it, to try and move the thing along.
I think, Frank, the other thing we got was a lot of support from different HMI with little snippets. of advice that you walked away with thinking, Frank and I were once, when we were developing a shortcut to the framework, how could we do a report in shortcut, and what did we not need to do? And this HMI said, he said there are those HMI who cross the road by the footbridge, those that go on the underground, and those like me who chance it crossing the road. And he said, that's not to say I haven't been knocked down many times.
But at least he recognised that he'd been knocked down.
Yeah.
These days, if a mistake's made, nobody's even willing to hold their hand up.
No, I do think, about senior leaders and why they're not wanting to take jobs on is related to this. That in effect, for me, there is this sort of like Ofsted, I still feel as though it's very unfair. It's not it's not actually, I don't think it's helping a lot of the schools in the most challenging communities very much. I think it's preventing head teachers who might, be sort of driven to go and work in those areas. It makes them think more than twice about whether they ought to do it. And actually, I think that there is, the key stage 4 results coming out this week, all of that and the way that's managed. And I think we were talking before about, how that's being controlled, by certain people in the press and people who've got national profiles, celebrating how wonderful their Progress 8 scores are. And you think, well, hang on a minute, there is a big warning sign on that DFE website saying it's really difficult, that these results are not as reliable, that you cannot compare. But what we've got is head teachers going out doing it, and some of them really high profile people using it as a sort of using it for ideological reasons to say, well, we've cracked it, we know what we're doing. I don't know where, I just think that this is really, there isn't those sorts of people, the HMIs within the system, to put this right. We've got pretty weak inspectors, I think, doing inspection to a model, and actually, they haven't really got the character or the experience, to go and tackle that sort of issue, which is what I think they would have done in years gone by.
But it's not even Ofsted's job, is it, to tell you how to teach?
No.
Tell you what to do. Ofsted should come in and judge what you're doing. And any school that keeps the same thing going year after year after year, how is it successful? Because it's about the cohort. Each cohort is different. And I know we always advocate start with early years and bring that early years through the school, which doesn't often happen. As we've already said, it gets knocked out of them. But you can't, it changes. Early years teachers are brilliant at finding out what the children are interested in and wrapping the curriculum that they have to teach around the interests of the children. And yet other schools are being lauded for doing the same. Oh, we've got it cracked, we've done this, and Ofsted have been in and they've said that it's this, that, and the other, and this is the way to do it. No, it's not the way to do it.
No, I do think that the Ofsted brand, we criticise it, but actually it's still held in too high a regard. As if to say, we know some of the people that do these inspections.
Yeah,
I don't put much credence on some of those outcomes. I
do think it's not changed. That's been the problem. It's not moved on. When Ofsted first started the regime of inspections in, what was it, 94, something like that, there were a lot of schools that were not doing things right. And within the next 10 years, that changed significantly because schools started doing self-evaluation. Schools started looking at what was going on in the classrooms in a much more detail. And we got a genuine, I believe, improvement in schools. But that rate of improvement hasn't continued because it can't. They've got to. So what they need to do now is concentrate on those schools that are still not in that. But reason why not go and say you're not this, you're not that, you're not that. Instead of doing that, do some work on why is it like that? Why is it schools in disadvantaged areas generally don't get outstanding? Why could that be? Is it worth having a bit of research on that?
But it gets back to, doesn't it, that the point Kendra was making about rather than it being about it's acknowledging that the challenges of some of those communities are significant, and you need somebody with a very sort of good range of experiences to bring to bear to assist head teachers in driving the improvement. And if you put a label on that, as soon as you put a judgment about how effective it is, you then start getting into sort of quite short-term strategies that can be introduced by one or two people to get it to good. that it can't sustain.
Mm.
You know, and actually what we need to do is to, I think, take that judgment away. And, you know, there unfortunately will be some schools that are, you know, really are very, very poor, and they need calling out, because that's not a good place for anybody to work in or to learn in. But, you know, I just think some of the schools that are in some of the most challenging communities are actually better than they're being judged. And that, you know, and that's the thing that's hurting the recruitment. It's hurting, you know, experienced head teachers going there. They won't do it. It's too big a risk.
I think there's also something, Frank, about HMI if we're talking about old HMI, let's use that as a phrase, because the way they were recruited, they were very confident in themselves. There wasn't a framework as such to work to. So they were using their own judgments, and as you say, they were bringing experience to bear, but they were confident. And if somebody told them, you know, you must say this about this school because they've ticked these 3 boxes, I think in those days they'd have said, no, I'm not doing that.
Yes,
because I use my knowledge and experience. I can tell you, you know, in fact, again, going back to a long time ago when we were inspectors, HMI would say, you know, that I'll tell you what that school is before you go in. It's a good school, or it's no better than satisfactory, or whatever, because they'd visited it and they'd made those judgments without a framework. But I don't think today, whether it's the political landscape or not, but I don't think inspectors feel as though they've got the freedom to be confident enough to say, well, actually, you haven't ticked these boxes, but I can feel in the school that this is a good school. So, you know, benefit of doubt, or I'm going to go out of the way and I'm going to say this is a good school, or this is outstanding. But they don't do that because there's a pressure on them not to do it. And I don't think there's confidence when you're only doing it short term, as let's say as a head teacher who's had 2 or 3 days training, a shadow inspection, and then you're on your own. I don't think you've got the confidence to work outside.
I mean, I was one of the big drivers. You know, I remember writing a paper for, I can't remember which HMCI it was, about bringing inspectors, head teachers in as inspectors. But actually, that only worked if they were with the HMI. They were always seen as, I don't mean this in a horrible way, but they were always seen as the junior partner. They were bringing something, but actually it was more of the sort of current practice, current view. But actually that only worked when they were actually, in my view, when they were actually within the family of HMI. You know, and those HMI were the HMI that had that broad range of experience. As soon as you started getting to a position, which is where we are now, where we're hearing that, you know, an HMI to last 3 years, they're doing really well. You know, they use it as a stepping stone to get into something else. So you've got pretty inexperienced HMI leading some senior leaders who actually might have been a head teacher for 20 years, but it might have been in 2 schools, you know, who's done a few inspections coming in, and that feels much weaker in terms of the range of experience they're bringing to bear on probably some really challenging, you know, for some of the most challenging communities where some of those difficult schools are. Anyway, Kendra, that was you know what, we've been going nearly about half an hour. We're only on that. All right, Kendra, what's caught your eye?
Well, it ties in, what's caught my eye ties in with that discussion, fortunately, because this week I saw a tweet on Twitter, obviously, and the Social Mobility Commission have commissioned the strictest head teacher in the country, Catherine Birbalsingh, and she's going to investigate, or they are going to investigate, which teaching styles work best to boost outcomes for poorer pupils. So, what is a poorer pupil?
Yeah.
And is a poorer pupil at Eton different to a poorer pupil in a school in the middle of Burnley?
Yeah.
What does poorer pupil mean? And how is there one teaching style? There is not one teaching style. That's like saying phonics is the only way to teach reading. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. There isn't a teaching style. So you ask different people. A couple of weeks ago, you had Bryn Llewellyn and Alan Davis on talking about move and learn. is there the correct teaching style? Is it back? Is it brain gym? Is it the hat thing with the different coloured hat? There is no right teaching style. It depends on the children, the pupils, each cohort changes. You can't, it's just ridiculous. And it just infuriated me.
I think what got to me with that wasn't so much the idea that somebody's going to research it, which must be costing millions if they're doing it properly, but that the person who's chairing it, I assume, says, I know my approach is the right approach. All right, so
well,
let's save millions and just introduce that everywhere.
Let's all be very strict.
Yeah,
yes.
But I'll have an open mind about this. But mine's the best.
So somebody did say in response to this, they weren't as pointed towards that individual, but they did say that surely we shouldn't really be expecting our children to do stuff that you wouldn't do yourself. So in effect, it was trying to say, I understand that when you go to a meeting, they were making the point, go to a meeting, you do expect somebody's chatting that you give them the respect, you're listening to them. If you want to make a comment, you wait for a gap, or you find a way in which you can communicate it. All of those things work in a classroom setting as well. But one of them said, but actually, when everyone comes out of the meeting, they are respectfully chatting to each other as they walk down a corridor to go to their next meeting or go back to their workplace. It's never done in silence. So what is happening here? That some elements of it you like, where you want to give them a situation where they can learn how to conduct themselves, how to gain this experience, how to share their idea. But then we actually turn them into sort of something completely different when they leave the classroom. I just, in a way, I thought that was for me, it was a really good point about, what are we actually trying to do here? Is this about really just controlling young people as opposed to trying to encourage them to see the way in which, good adults, shall we say, or positive role models about how adults, get on at work, just seems really bizarre.
You can't control young people, can you? I mean, this is a ridiculous example, but our eldest granddaughter started school in September, so EYFS, loves it, very keen, and after 2 days came out crying. She'd been put onto amber, or orange as she calls it, for wriggling on the carpet. But so we talked to her and she was fine. But the next day she came out and she said, and we said, "Oh, are you on green today?" Yeah, I stayed on green. I did manage to do some wriggling, but when the teacher wasn't looking. She's 4. She's only just 4. So you cannot tell young children how or what to do because they're going to find the system.
Yeah.
But neither should we. And the one thing about, if you read the wider stuff, is this other concept that you must be absolutely obedient to the teacher in absolute terms. Now, for me, I would question that under safeguarding.
Yeah.
It's. I'm not saying all teachers are a risk, but some teachers are a risk. And if you've already said to a child, regardless of who it is or what they tell you to do, you must obey, I think that's a really frightening thing to have as your policy when you've got a safeguarding policy alongside it that says children should make sure that they're safe and they shouldn't be doing necessarily everything an adult tells them to do.
But I think it's in a way, going back to the point Kendra made about, about trying, is it what we're after? Is to try and have every school trying to do it in exactly the same way? No. And the issue then is around, well, if it doesn't work, I mean, there's always the problem with Ofsted, in effect, or a body telling you to do it, and then it doesn't work. And then they can say, well, it doesn't work. I didn't want to do it in the first place. It's your fault. Why are we doing that? Actually just allow people the time and the development, the professional development, to find out what works best in their setting.
You only got to look at the national strategies, haven't you, Frank, to say, where are they now?
They're in room 101 from last time I was on.
And bless them, because I've worked with some very, very talented teacher advisors, very, very talented. But it wasn't long before they denied ever having done the clock.
Yeah.
No, we never pushed that. I was sat in the audience when you did.
Exactly, and isn't it funny that this? I'm sure all schools do this. Right, we'll wait for the inspection. Ofsted have been in. Now we're going to try this.
Yeah, that's
and
the
they're going to try all the experiments, all the trying and failing. In my last headship, we wrote our own curriculum because the national curriculum was just ridiculous for the children in that school. It took us 2 years to write that curriculum. Well, because of the emphasis on the curriculum now, how could you do that now until like the week after you've been inspected? Because you wouldn't dare say, well, actually, we can't tell you everything because we're just in the midst of doing it. Oh, right, well, we'll just put you in a category then.
Yeah. I mean, it's
I can say factually, when we were trying to do some stuff on creativity, and it was when might have been Every Child Matters at that point, or it might be another, where we're doing stuff. All schools said, virtually all schools said, yeah, we're really excited, we want to do it, but we'll wait until after Ofsted have been before.
Absolutely.
And in a sense, you can understand it, but it does, as Kendra says there, it does mean you can't actually rework your curriculum because you haven't got time between inspections to have it embedded and not be criticised because you've not got it embedded.
Yes.
So presumably, no curriculums will develop.
No, they've all got to be fully formed, fully nice,
fully formed already,
evaluated, tested, and judged to be effective before you actually see anybody from,
before you try it.
Yeah. Well, what's caught my eye this week was really tomorrow. Bond Street Station in London is opening. It's believe it or not, £500 million overspent. Its budget has exceeded by 500 million. The total cost was 660 million. This is one underground station in London, and it's all part of the Crossrail project. And the reason why the government and it's a series of governments invested in this Crossrail project was because there's a formula for working out whether or not it's going to pay for itself in a way by driving up productivity. And of course, in an area like London, you put some big project in, it's going to drive up productivity, because it's a very productive place. So you make it even more productive, it will get even more productive. And the case for me was around that, what could have that money have done in a different area? And what could that have meant for not just education but for services locally? And you've got, please bear in mind, this is one railway station. We're not talking about Crossrail. That sum is vast. This is one railway station, and I was also struck by the fact that the Institute for Fiscal Studies were looking at the amount of money that had been invested, additional money that had been invested in schools since 2017, and the least deprived had a 5% growth in funding, and the most deprived had a 1% growth in funding. And in a way, I think, Stan, you were mentioning before that it's all around the base figure and whatever.
Yeah, it's because at some point they've been balancing out the local authorities' different formulas, which did tend to, I don't say disadvantaged schools, but the formula was such that they recognised the additional funds that needed to go in for free school meals, etc.
But the thing is here is where I take that point, but from 2017, the most deprived communities have had a 1% increase, a 1% increase. So in effect, that's if you take inflation into account, the impact of that. And in a way, it's quite sad when you think about the current government's view, or the previous government. We're in the sort of like, we don't know what government we've got at the moment.
The same government, Frank, just a different cabinet. Let's be clear on that one.
We're talking about sluggish growth, and I think all three of us would say, well, actually, if you want to deal with sluggish growth, you've got to tackle the education of the young people that are going to produce the growth, or do more to train up existing adults in terms of giving them additional abilities or opportunities to be educated, to enhance the contribution they can bring to a business.
Recognise the subject areas that are money generating, like the creative arts and computing thing, and put them into a baccalaureate rather than have arts and creative stuff ruled out.
Yes. It's see, we've got to be really careful here, because we're going to go back over some of the conversation. I think somebody's done a bit of analysis on some at the school that you were talking about, Kendra, and about what opportunities, what subjects can you study there, and it's very, very, very narrow. So in effect, some of the subjects which you would expect to see within all the subjects within the national curriculum are not covered, as far as I'm aware, are not used as part of the examination process at that school, and there may well be others. So in a way, is a child actually getting a good education if elements of a broad curriculum are not included?
Well, again, look back to if you want to go to university and get a student grant, student loan, you have to get maths and English.
Yeah. Do you know
what percentage of creative people does that just stop them entering university?
Yeah.
I was with someone yesterday that writes music scores for advertisements and films and things like that, and it's English and maths. She doesn't need it. She's a very, very gifted musician. But she did get her English and maths to get to university.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, the algorithm. I've been sort of thinking about this because with the publication of the Key Stage 4 results and the P8s, that's all based on a very simple algorithm that English and maths count double, basically. That's, once you've done that, you virtually, if you don't get those, then you're stuffed on the P8 score. Actually, I've started to play around with that. Well, what if it was just 1? What if English and maths counted as 1? And actually, you needed to, you got knocked back scores if you didn't provide the opportunity to study GCSE or A-level, GCSE specifically, in a particular subject. You actually lost, even if you had the best results in maths and English, you were being penalised because you didn't include children in this subject area. What would happen then to the decisions that are made by senior leaders? What would they do then? Well, I think what they would do is they would start putting children into these subject areas. And we'd end up with a much broader experience for young people. So all we're doing is playing around with an algorithm. We've all assumed that the algorithm, where everything counts, those English and maths count double. Oh, that's right. That's the right way to do it, isn't it? We've all fallen for it. It's not the algorithm itself, and everybody says, "Oh, P8s are much fair." Yeah, P8 is probably much fairer than Attainment 8, but we're assuming that the actual algorithm that judges P8 is right, and it's probably open to debate about whether or not it is right. That's it's just starting to tease out what it might look like in a different world. Right. What are you going to put in room 101?
Oh, well, we've not discussed it. Stan has alluded to it. I am putting the current government into room 101. All of them, every single one of them, they're being shoved in there with great force.
They can't come out. They can never come out. Is that what
never come out?
There's no redemption. There's no redemption. They cannot.
Anyone that's been in the cabinet, anyone that's been a previous prime minister, the previous prime minister's going first. They're actually hammered in, and then anyone who's been in the cabinet, just to put that into context, this is the week that Liz Truss has resigned after 44 days, 10 of which we were mourning the Queen.
And another 5 of which was conference.
Conference, yeah. So and she's going to get is it 115,000 a year for life pension for having been Prime Minister. So no, they've all got. I'm tired of it. We're embarrassing. We're embarrassed as a country. I mean, the journalists on the news programs abroad, I don't know if you've seen any. I saw one the other day from Germany, and it was when they'd been effing and blinding. You know, the bloke walks out effing and blinding, and she's speaking in German, and then you get all the. Obviously, she said in German, and he said, and then you get there, and the virtually in hysterics. We're a laughing stock. They've got to go. They've got bring on a general election. They've got to go. That's me being non-political.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I just think, you know, the idea that you can have a failed senior leadership team and have a break over the summer and then bring them back as a different 2.0 and everybody be happy with that. It's just mad.
Yeah, I mean, there are times in our careers where, well, I certainly for one felt as though I needed to stand down because actually I'd given my all. There's not, I physically was drained, and actually I was standing in the way of children having a better chance. You know, in a way, I feel as though at the moment with this government, they don't think about it and what's the best for the country. They're just thinking about, well, actually, I really ought to stand down. I think all of them will get what everyone's saying about a general election, but they're about self-preservation.
Yeah.
And the cronies, as much money as they can get to their cronies as quickly as possible before they get the boot, because they know it's coming.
The fact that they're talking about when they choose a leader, they're looking for the person who will be the best to fight Keir Starmer tells me they're not thinking who will best get this mess sorted out, who can, you know, make sure the disadvantaged have got, who can make sure levelling up happens. None of that. It's so we need to try and win the next election to keep our jobs.
That's the reason why.
Imagine the United fans if after Ralph Ragnick finished, they announced, and here we are, we've got our new leader, it's Solskjaer. Because over the last 3/4 of a season, he's been very different, and he's realised what his mistakes are.
He's been on holiday. He's been on holiday 3 times when he should have been working, so we'll bring him back. So I've got to put the lot of them in there.
Well, that's the first time we've ever had the government put in room 101.
Let's hope you don't let them out.
Well, it's been a great chat. Thank you. Here we are. It's a Sunday afternoon. Normally I'm sort of sitting down just mooching about, but it's been a real pleasure to join you two for this a really enjoyable chat. So thank you very much, and all being well, Stan and I have got another guest next Friday. Probably won't have as strong a viewing figures as yours, Kendra, but anyway.
Don't jinx them.
On an unstable signal.
Yeah, because you're in Wales. Will you be in Wales?
I'll be in Wales next Friday.
Right. Well, there we go. Well, who knows what it's going to be like? But anyway,
Super Sub will be waiting.
All right. Well, take care, everybody, and thank you for listening and watching. It's been a pleasure to do it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.